For decades, Jackie Chan has been one of the most recognizable action stars on the planet. From the streets of Hong Kong to the heights of Hollywood, the man built a legendary career for himself, known for his unmatched stunt work, incredible fight choreography, and an on-screen persona that blends comedy with action that is quite literally death-defying. Of course, Jackie Chan's off-screen persona, or to be frank, his rather controversial political opinions and oftentimes questionable personal life, has significantly shifted his public image over the past decade or so, both in the Western world, but especially in his native Hong Kong. Still, the man's achievements in and influence on the film industry cannot be denied, especially since making movies in Hong Kong between the 1960s and the early 90s meant that you weren't just dealing with actors, directors, and producers, because you were also dealing with gangsters.
I used to make the payoffs to the Triads. Usually I pay them $300 US per day. But sometimes they may ask up to 6.5.
At the peak of its golden era, Hong Kong cinema wasn't just a thriving film industry, it was also a lucrative playground for organized crime. In Hong Kong, it was the Triads, the descendants of China's secret societies, that ran the show. Beyond the usual gang business portfolio, drugs, etc., they also ran production companies, extorted actors, disrupted sets, and used movies to launder vast sums of money. Refusing to cooperate wasn't always an option, and for some, the consequences of crossing the wrong people were fatal. Jackie Chan, on the other hand, was one of the few major stars in Hong Kong during that era who not only avoided the Triads, but also openly pushed back against them. Say what you will about the man's political opinions, but one thing we can certainly all agree on. Organized crime kinda sucks, and he refused to let gangsters control his career, even in the face of death threats and intimidation.
I'm the first one to say in the newspaper, I hate the bloody gangster.
And yet, despite his resistance, even he couldn't completely escape their influence at times. And that is exactly why today we will dive deep into both the Triad's history with the Hong Kong entertainment business as a whole, and the career of Jackie Chan himself, in an attempt to find out how their paths ended up intertwining, leading to some pretty fascinating stories about shady deals and real-life dangers that he had to face throughout his career. But first, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more Asian organized crime content in the future. And for those of you who are especially enthusiastic about supporting me even further, check out that Patreon link below. That being said, I guess it's now time to earn your support. So let's get into it. This is Jackie Chan's beef with the Triad gangs, explained. Hong Kong cinema has a much longer history than you might think. Today, with the industry facing multiple challenges ranging from financial struggles to political pressures and censorship, most people associate Hong Kong films with one golden era, the 1980s and, to some extent, the early 90s. But the roots of HK cinema, they stretch back far earlier than that. Movies had been in production in Hong Kong since the early 20th century, but the foundation for what would become this boom period was laid in the aftermath of World War II. The Chinese Civil War that followed shortly thereafter forced millions to flee the mainland, with many seeking refuge in Hong Kong, and that included some of China's top filmmaking talent at the time. You see, up until then, Hong Kong's film industry had actually lagged behind its mainland counterpart, particularly Shanghai, which had long been the epicenter of Chinese cinema. But everything would change in the 1950s and 60s, as Hong Kong pretty rapidly transformed into an economic powerhouse and, in parallel, one of the world's largest producers of film. And among the many studios that emerged in Hong Kong after the war, One would go on to dominate the early years of the industry and shape generations of filmmakers: Shaw Brothers Limited. The story of Shaw Brothers dates back to 1925 when Ran Jie-shaw and his brothers founded the Tianyi Film Company in Shanghai. They later relocated their operations to Hong Kong in the 1930s, overcoming numerous hardships, including World War II and the Japanese occupation. And after the war, they started to rebuild. In 1957, the youngest of the Shaw Brothers, Run, officially established Shaw Brothers Hong Kong Limited, and in 1961, they unveiled their crown jewel, Movietown. Spanning over 40 acres with 15 stages, a workforce of around 1,300 and state-of-the-art filmmaking technology, Movietown set the gold standard for Chinese-language cinema from the mid-60s onwards. And the scale of Shaw Brothers' production output certainly matched the size of its studio, churning out dozens of films each year. And among them was a set of films that will go on to define an entire genre: the martial arts movie. At the time, martial arts fiction, also known as wuxia, was banned on the mainland, making Hong Kong the new home of the genre. Influenced in part by the popularity of Japanese samurai films, stories of heroic martial artists captivated audiences in Hong Kong and beyond, and the Shaw Brothers were at the forefront of this trend, producing numerous hits that became box office sensations. Films like The One-Armed Swordsman or The 36th Chamber of Shaolin. Shoutouts to the Wu-Tang Clan. Didn't just define a genre, they also made the Shaw Brothers incredibly wealthy. During the early years of the post-war HK film industry, the Shaw Brothers had virtually no serious competition. A dominance that was great for business, but not necessarily for their employees. And as fate would have it, their iron grip on the industry would inadvertently open the doors for Hong Kong's criminal underworld to enter the business. Because of their near monopoly, the Shaw Brothers could get away with paying what were essentially slave wages. And this didn't just affect background workers. Allegedly, even lead actors were often paid shockingly little for their efforts. Many Hong Kong-based actors of that time period actually came from the world of Chinese opera, a form of musical theater with a history spanning over 1,000 years. It was also China's preferred form of entertainment until movies really hit their stride. And so, for the performers, a transition into film seemed like an obvious career choice. But in doing so, these performers-turned-actors also paved the way for someone else to enter the film industry along with them: the Triads. The Triads' connections to Chinese performance arts date back at least to the early 20th century. Back then, the Triads, or secret societies, weren't purely criminal organizations as they are today. Don't get me wrong, a criminal element, as well as high-profile gangsters focused on wealth and power, were certainly to be found among the Triads of the early 20th century. However, politically driven revolutionaries made up the majority of their membership and leadership, and for them, the traveling Chinese opera troupes of the time provided a convenient cover for their movements. By the 1950s, however, China's secret societies faced a similar fate as the nation's film industry. As a civil war raged on the mainland, they fled to British-controlled Hong Kong, where they found not only new recruits but also fresh financial opportunities, including the rapidly growing Hong Kong film industry. With a flood of young, talented, but also severely underpaid actors and stuntmen desperate to make ends meet, the Triads saw an opening. The Shaw Brothers' dominance meant wages in the industry were laughably low, pushing many performers to seek alternative ways to survive. And oftentimes, it was the Triads that offered them jobs as enforcers, debt collectors, and small-time muscle for their various illicit activities. Jobs that often paid far better than what they could earn in the film business. This created a major problem, a direct link between organized crime and Hong Kong's entertainment industry. And it didn't stop at film. Soon, the television and music industries, which were closely tied to the movie business, became entangled as well. With their foot in the door, the Triads didn't stop at merely recruiting desperate performers, because eventually, they started running the show. Triad-controlled production companies, talent agencies, and music labels became commonplace. So much so that having a career in Hong Kong's entertainment industry almost guaranteed that you would cross paths with a gangster at some point. And right in the middle of all this, an immensely talented young actor and stuntman named Jackie Chan was laying the foundation for what would become one of the greatest careers in cinematic history. One of Jackie Chan's most well-known traits is his relentless work ethic, something that shaped him almost from the very moment that he was born. Born in 1954 in Hong Kong as Chan Kong-sang, he was the only son of Chan Charles and Li Li, political refugees who had fled mainland China during the Civil War. His birth itself was already a bit unusual. Jackie spent a full 12 months in the womb instead of the usual 9, and he later joked that those 3 extra months were the easiest of his entire life. Jackie's father had high expectations for him. A student of northern-style kung fu himself, he began training Jackie in the basics of martial arts from the time he was just 4 or 5 years old. But beyond the basics of martial arts, Jackie's father also gave him a simple but powerful piece of advice. Don't do drugs, don't join a Triad gang, and don't gamble. Jackie managed to follow 2 of these rules. He's admitted to being an avid gambler for most of his life, but he stayed away from drugs and, perhaps even more impressively, managed to fend off the Triads throughout his entire career. That is no small feat, considering that his rise in the film industry coincided with the height of the Shaw Brothers' dominance, the very period when organized crime became so deeply intertwined with Hong Kong cinema. Like most Hong Kong actors of the time, Jackie got his start in the industry by transitioning from Chinese opera. At just 7 years old, he was enrolled in the Chinese Drama Academy, a Peking opera school in Kowloon run by Master Yu Jim-yen. He would spend a grueling 10 years there, training from 5 AM to midnight every single day, studying the martial arts, acrobatics, and acting, alongside other future stars like his 2 closest academy friends, Sammo Hung and Yuan Biao. Through the academy, he would also land his first small movie role at just 8 years old, in 1962's Big and Little Wong Tin Bar. And just a few years later, Jackie had developed a reputation as one of the best stuntmen that Hong Kong had to offer, and later as a talented martial arts choreographer. In 1976, a movie producer by the name of Willie Chan took notice and offered Jackie his first starring role under director Lo Wei, best known for working with none other than Bruce Lee on some of his biggest films before his untimely death in 1973. Lo Wei saw Jackie as his next Bruce Lee, and his 1976 film New Fist of Fury was meant to introduce him to the world of cinema as just that. It didn't work. The film flopped hard, and so did Lo Wei's other attempts to mold Jackie into a clone of the late great Bruce Lee. Still, Jackie's big break was actually just around the corner. But his rise to superstardom would only come after distancing himself from Lo Wei, when he stopped trying to be the next Bruce Lee and started being, Jackie Chan. But as it turned out, breaking away from Lo Wei Productions and stepping into the spotlight came with its own set of dangers. Jackie's newfound fame put him directly in the path of the very people that his own father had warned him about years earlier, the Triads. Jackie Chan's rise to fame truly began when he was loaned out to Seasonal Film Corporation on a 2-film deal. Teaming up with director Yuan Wu-ping, Jackie absolutely knocked it out of the park with back-to-back hits. Snake in the Eagle's Shadow and the legendary Drunken Master, both released in 1978. By giving Jackie complete creative control over his own stunt work, these films introduced something fresh to a martial arts genre that had grown a bit predictable: kung fu comedy. This unique blend of humor and high-flying action would become Jackie Chan's signature style. And perhaps more importantly, these films were massive box office successes, making him the hottest new star in Hong Kong cinema. But of course, there was one problem. Jackie's contract with seasonal film, it was a temporary thing, and despite his newfound superstardom, he was still tied to Lo Wei's production company. Lo Wei was of course thrilled. His next cash cow was set to return, armed with a winning formula that could guarantee years, if not decades, of box office gold. After some initial disputes upon his return to Lo Wei Productions, Jackie was given his directorial debut with 1979's The Fearless Hyena. And sure enough, it was another major hit, and with things looking up, he even agreed to sign a new contract with Lo Wei's company. However, almost as soon as Jackie had put pen to paper, other offers started rolling in. Big offers. For example, the fading Shaw brothers made a bid for him, hoping to retain their former dominance. But by far the most enticing offer would come from their biggest rival, Lo Wei's former employer, and the studio that had also propelled Bruce Lee to international fame. The deal offered by Golden Harvest was hard to refuse. Unlimited budgets, full creative freedom, and a signing-on bonus of 4.2 million HK dollars. A life-changing amount of money for the up-and-coming star. It was too good to pass up, and so, despite his existing contract with Lo Wei, Jackie signed with Golden Harvest and immediately started working on his first film under their banner, The Young Master. And it was on a set of this exact movie when things got dangerous. According to Jackie's 1998 autobiography, I Am Jackie Chan, My Life in Action, strange events started happening on set. One day, a fire broke out in front of the studio, which was later determined by the police to be arson. Another day, a Golden Harvest executive found the severed head of a dog in his car. Some straight up Godfather type shit. And sure enough, these weren't random incidents. Jackie soon realized that he had drawn the attention of the Triads. One evening, after a long day of filming, Jackie was approached by 3 men outside Golden Harvest Studios. They didn't introduce themselves. Instead, they simply told him to follow them and step into a car that had its license plates covered up with gaffer's tape. Jackie did not have much of a choice. These guys looked like they were not to be effed with. He stepped into the car and they took off, and a few minutes later, they arrived at their destination, Lo Wei Productions. Jackie was escorted inside and into Lo Wei's office where the studio boss was already waiting. He told the 3 men to leave the room, pulled out Jackie's contract, his old salary had been scratched out, and handed him a pen. You just write in whatever number you want there, cause I know I can trust you to be reasonable. On paper, it was a generous offer, but Jackie wasn't naive. The 3 men waiting outside, they weren't just drivers, they were gangsters, members of the Sun Yee-on, one of Hong Kong's most powerful Triad gangs as it later turned out. And Lo Wei told Jackie straight up that he could no longer control the actions of his colleagues should he fail to fulfill his contract at Lo Wei Productions. Now, Jackie was allowed to leave Lo Wei's office unharmed that night, but he wasn't off the hook just yet. Not by a long shot. The Young Master, the Golden Harvest movie that Jackie had been working on at the time, was around 2/3 complete at that point, and the rest of its production would be incredibly stressful. Not only because Jackie had the whole Triad threat constantly swirling around in his mind, but also because they were literally waiting for him outside Golden Harvest Studios the following day, demanding an answer to Lo Wei's demands. Ultimately, Jackie agreed to do Lo's next movie, under the condition that he also got to finish The Young Master at the same time. And so, for the following week, Jackie would be working on 2 movies at the same time. The post-production of The Young Master and the pre-production of whatever kind of movie the Triads expected Jackie to make. But on set, Lo Wei was actually nowhere to be found. Instead, Jackie found himself constantly surrounded by Triad members on set, and when he asked the gangsters what kind of movie they wanted him to make, they simply told him, an action movie. Now, according to Jackie Chan himself, he never had any intentions of actually delivering. He was just stalling, because behind the scenes, his longtime friend and now manager, and the same guy who got him the deal with Golden Harvest in the first place, Willie Chan, was working on a way out. Willie told Jackie that they had 3 major problems that needed solving. The first problem was to finish the young master. Hard work, but certainly doable. The second problem was quite a bit trickier. Jackie's contract with Lo Wei. It turned out that Lo had secretly included a 10 million Hong Kong dollar buyout clause. A small fortune that could very well have been a deal breaker. Well, that was until Raymond Chow, the founder of Golden Harvest, stepped in. He ended up paying the full amount himself, permanently severing Jackie's ties with Lo Wei Productions. The third and biggest problem? Obviously, the Triads. The Triads weren't just looking for a quick payout. They wanted a piece of Jackie's career, and getting rid of them would not be easy. Thankfully, Willie Chan managed to find the right man to do just that. An actor by the name of Jimmy Wang Yu. Jimmy Wang Yu wasn't just any actor. He was the star of 1967's The One-Armed Swordsman, and more importantly, a man with deep connections to the criminal underworld. He was an associate, and according to some, even a member of the Taiwanese Bamboo Union Triads. Shady? Absolutely. But in that moment, he was exactly what Jackie and Willie needed. And so, Wang Yu would arrange a meeting between Lo Wei, the Sun Yee-on Triad, and Golden Harvest, hoping to broker a deal while Jackie and Willie fled to the Americas. You know, just in case things went sideways. And apparently, they almost did. Even Jackie admitted in his autobiography that he never knew exactly what went down in that meeting. But it did not go smoothly. Allegedly, things got so heated at one point that the police had to be called in. But in the end, a deal was struck. Lo Wei agreed to leave Jackie alone in exchange for the 10 million HK dollars and the rights to 2 unfinished films Jackie had worked on, while the Sun Yee-on agreed to not harass Jackie any further. All that was left to do was for Jackie to repay Jimmy Wang Yu with a couple of favors. Which he did years later by starring in 2 shitty movies that Wang Yu made. And that is how Jackie Chan's first major run-in with the Triads finally came to an end. It's kind of wild to think about how differently his career could have gone. If the Sun Yee-on had kept their hold on him, would Golden Harvest have backed off? Would Jackie's career have taken a different path? What would that mysterious action movie he was supposed to make have looked like? I guess we'll never know. What we do know, however, is that despite shaking off the Sun Yee-on, this wouldn't be the last time that Jackie Chan crossed paths with the Triads. In his more recent autobiography, 2015's Never Grow Up, Jackie Chan recounts yet another run-in with what appeared to be Triad members. He never specifies exactly when this happened, but he does state that at the time he was working as a fight director on an unnamed film and staying at the Lincoln Plaza Hotel, which interestingly enough seems to be a hotel in London. If anyone out there has an idea which movie this might have been, drop a comment. Jackie claims that one day while working on this unidentified movie, someone knocked on the door of his dressing room. It was extremely early in the morning, not a time when someone would usually be knocking at his door, and so Jackie decided to look through the peephole to see who it was. Outside stood 2 men, armed with bladed weapons, waiting for him to come out. Jackie's instincts kicked in. He went looking for 2 knives that he had in his room and prepared to step outside for a fight. But when he took another careful look out the peephole, the men had vanished. It later turned out that he had encountered them the day before outside the film set. He had dismissed them, which they took as an insult, and the following morning they had returned looking for revenge. After the incident, security on set was increased, but according to Jackie, the two men were never seen again. No epic Triad knife fight to be found here, unfortunately.
This scene, maybe I just after, boom.
But even after escaping Lo Wei, outmaneuvering the Sun Eon, and narrowly avoiding a potentially fatal ambush outside his dressing room, a career completely free of Triad interference was simply impossible, even for someone as wildly successful as Jackie Chan. By the early 90s, Jackie wasn't just a Hong Kong superstar anymore. He was the most famous man in Asia, with Hollywood success waiting just around the corner. But while the Triads simply couldn't touch him at this point, they could still go after the people surrounding him. The Hong Kong film industry in the 80s and early 90s wasn't just booming. It was also crawling with Triad involvement. Some of the biggest production companies of the time had deep ties to organized crime. Wins Entertainment and China Star, for example, were both founded by Charles Hung, whose family had a long history with the Sun Eon Triad, and the Triad influence could be felt not only behind the cameras, but in front of them too. Movies featuring gangsters, both as heroes and villains, became a staple of 80s and 90s Hong Kong action cinema, and Jackie Chan's films were no exception. Watching them now, it almost feels like he was using these movies as an outlet. You know, kicking some Triad ass on screen as a way to vent his frustrations about their real-world interference. And honestly, it would make perfect sense, because Jackie was furious about what the Triads were doing to the industry. In 1992, he decided to take his most public stand yet, leading a public protest under the banner "Showbiz Against Violence." Alongside some of Hong Kong's biggest actors, Jackie Chan marched against Triad extortion, intimidation, and violence in the film industry.
嚟到現場，先俾5萬佢哋，跟住每日俾5000，臨拆警嗰日就要俾3萬，如果唔係就燒報警。我覺得好離譜啊！嗰啲人嗰啲樣咧仲係點啊？俾5萬先喎啊！ 帶一班人嗰時會價錢嘅，你係10萬，我俾你1萬，我仲要日日要有期嘅，呢啲咪唔按住呢個規矩做戲咯？你明唔明白？做又唔係做大嘢喎，係打人2巴啊，打人架車啊，一有事又寫咗佢啊。
One of the most vocal figures at Jackie's side that day was Philip Chan. If you're in any way interested in Hong Kong action films from the boom era, you've probably seen this guy before. You know, he's that one cop in Winners and Sinners, and that one cop in Police Story 3, and that one cop in Hardboiled. Yeah, pretty much every role he took was as a policeman, and there was a good reason for that too. You see, before his career in the film industry, Philip Chan had actually been a superintendent in the Royal Hong Kong Police Force.
But I didn't think a cop should be stereotyped. But after I left the police force and became an actor, all the producers and casting directors, you just tell me, Philip, we can only give you parts in cops' movies. You look like a cop and nothing else.
He even worked as an undercover officer for a while, which means that this guy experienced firsthand just how violent and dangerous the Triads could be. And even after leaving his career in law enforcement behind him, his encounters with them didn't stop. Speaking about the Triads' involvement in the Hong Kong film industry, Philip Chan said, quote, "With hundreds of movies being made per year, obviously there's a shortage of actors and directors, and that will give rise to conflicts with scheduling filming and engaging actors. When reasoning couldn't solve the problem, the Triads would resort to violence. In the day-to-day filming, we were being extorted in the streets. They would demand anything from $50 to $2,000. Sometimes you would get 2 or 3 groups coming at different times. They would try to tamper with the equipment, they would obstruct filming. Sometimes they would intimidate the actors, and it was very difficult to get police protection." The catalyst for the 1992 protests was a brazen act of Triad aggression at Mandarin International Films. In January of that year, 4 armed men stormed the company's offices and stole the reels for the newly completed All's Well Ends Well, starring Stephen Chow and Leslie Chung. And allegedly, the words "your boss offended our boss" were uttered. During the protest, Jackie and his fellow actors claimed that around 90% of the industry was under Triad control. And looking at the sheer number of violent incidents happening in the industry at the time, that number doesn't seem far-fetched at all. During this period, the industry was plagued by kidnappings, extortion, and even murder. Andy Lau's manager was reportedly once held at gunpoint by a triad who was trying to lock the actor into an exclusive 3-year movie deal. And in April of 1992, just 3 months after the protests, Chet Lee's manager, Jimmy Choi Ji-ming, was gunned down as he stepped out of an elevator in front of his Hong Kong office. His brutal murder believed to be tied to his own connections within the underworld. Even Hong Kong's music industry wasn't safe. A month after Jimmy Choi's murder, Anita Mui, one of the biggest cantopop stars at the time, was publicly slapped across the face at a karaoke bar by a suspected Triad-affiliated movie director after she had refused to sing for him. The following day, the director was attacked with a butcher's knife and then shot and killed in his hospital bed as he was recovering from the attack. And the violence didn't stop there. Over a year after the Anita Mui incident, in 1993, Triad boss Andeli Chan, also known as the Tiger of Wan Chai, was assassinated in Macau alongside 2 of his associates. His murder was believed to be an act of retaliation for his crimes in Hong Kong, which included the suspected murder of the aforementioned director that slapped Anita Mui. But going back to Jackie Chan's story, only a few years after these anti-Triad protests took place, he finally managed to achieve international stardom. With Rumble in the Bronx in 1995 and Rush Hour in 1998, Jackie Chan became an international superstar, a household name far beyond East Asia. He now spent most of his time working in an industry that was pretty much untouched by the Triads, but even during his time in Hollywood, the Hong Kong gangsters were obviously still on his mind. He continued featuring them in his films, introducing a new global audience to the kind of gangsters that had been bothering him for decades, and even though he was now working thousands of miles away, he still didn't hold back when it came to criticizing just how much control the Triads still had over the Hong Kong film industry and the colleagues he had left behind. In his 1998 autobiography, just before diving into the story about his run-in with Lo Wei and his Triad connections, Jackie reflects on the state of the Hong Kong entertainment industry at the time. Quote, "The Triad hold on Hong Kong entertainment is so strong that it's now become almost an accepted part of the business. Many directors and stars now speak of good Triads and bad Triads. Good Triads being the ones who take money without threatening violence. I suppose the implication is that if you have to work with gangsters, you should pick only the best. It's an awful situation. My feeling is that we shouldn't have to do business with gangsters at all, good, bad, or indifferent. Hong Kong's entertainers have never had much power compared to Hollywood stars, but working together, we should be able to make a difference." End quote. And certainly, by 1998, things were starting to change, but not because the entire Hong Kong film industry had suddenly decided to take a stand. In reality, it was the Triads themselves who had begun pulling out of the business. By the mid-90s, Hong Kong cinema had entered a sharp decline, and for the Triads, the film industry was first and foremost still a business, a means of making and laundering lots of money rather than a genuine passion. And when the industry started struggling, so did its value as an investment. This of course coincided with the 1997 handover of Hong Kong from Britain to China that came with increased pressure from law enforcement that had been more than a decade in the making, marking the beginning of a broader decline in Triad activity. In short, bothering Hong Kong filmmakers and actors just wasn't worth it anymore. Ironically, some of the best Triad movies ever made, in my opinion, actually came after this decline. Johnny To's 2005 film Election and its 2006 sequel offer an unfiltered, brutal look at the inner workings of Hong Kong's underworld. Movies that, just 1.5 decades prior, might never even have been possible in an industry where the Triads still held so much control. The last time, at least as of the making of this video, that Jackie Chan publicly spoke out about the Triads was back in 2012. I briefly mentioned this in my History of the Hong Kong Triads video. Check it out if you haven't. But if you did, you might remember that I wasn't exactly convinced by this particular story. But you know what? After doing a lot more research into the life of Jackie Chan and the Hong Kong film industry's history of the Triads, I still think he was talking out of his ass here. It was during an interview with the South China Morning Post that Jackie made a wild claim, quote, "In the past, when they bullied me, I hid in the United States. They opened fire at me once I got off the aeroplane. From that moment on, I needed to carry a gun every day I went out. I told them that they had been going too far and that I had been hiding from them. Later on, I confronted them with 2 guns and 6 grenades." This statement was bold enough that it actually triggered an investigation by the Hong Kong police. No wonder, given the city's incredibly strict gun control laws, let alone the idea of casually carrying around 6 frickin' grenades. This was a rather wild claim. But unsurprisingly, the investigation never led to anything, most likely because it was either completely, or at least partially, made up. Jackie is, after all, also a writer, and that whole story sounds way more like an early draft for an action movie script than something that actually happened, in my opinion. But regardless of whether he exaggerated or not, one thing is undeniable. Jackie Chan has dealt with the Triads for his entire life in rather impressive fashion. Say what you will about the man's political opinions, his personal life, but the fact that he built the most successful movie career in Hong Kong history, all without Triad backing and while being incredibly outspoken against them, is pretty damn impressive. And I don't know about you, but in my eyes, regardless of what was going on behind the scenes, Jackie kicking some Triad ass on screen never gets old. And that's all I got to say for this one. Now, it's your turn to leave a comment. Let me know what your all-time favorite Jackie Chan movie is. You can probably tell from a heavy use of clips from the movie in this video, but my favorite is definitely the first police story. It's such a perfect blend of comedy, drama, and of course some of Jackie's most memorable stunts ever. Amazing stuff. Almost as amazing as all of my dear Patreon supporters listed here, including Bobby Wu, Ronan, Javier Sodavia, Capybara Chuck, Turam, Daniel Dees, RK0, Sierra DC, White Gilden, Justin Down, Yoko the Space Whale, Steve Matsui, Cats and Soup, Chart B-Man, Ben Harradine, Metal Mama, and T-Bird. And to everyone else who is still here, thank you so much for watching. Joy Gin.